This lesson is working on roots and radical expressions. So we've done a lot with square roots in this course, and then we've started to do things with cube roots. Now you're going to start to see roots that are larger. So you can even see just in the beginning here, we have something to the fourth root and to the fifth root. The idea is still the same. You're still looking for what number multiplied by itself that many number of times gives you the number on the inside. So I put up a video of how to find those buttons on your graphing calculator if you have one at home. I'll also put up a video for how to find that with Desmos if you want to use Desmos online graphing calculator to use that. Okay, so if I look at this first one here, okay, I'm looking for the cubed root of 343. All right, that number is going to be 7 because if you take 7 to the third power, that's going to give you 343. If I look at 81 and I take the fourth root, okay, I can also find this on your calculator, so this isn't something that I have memorized, but you're going to take that and plug it into your calculator, you'll get 3. And the reason why that value is 3 is because if you take 3 to the fourth power, that will give you your value of 81. And then the fifth root of 1024 is 4, because 4 to the fifth power gives you that 1024. You can also write anything with an nth root as that value as a fraction. So for example, if I have the square root of x, that's the same thing as x to the 1/2. If I have the cubed root of x, that's the same thing as x to the 1/3. And if I have the fourth root of x, that's the same thing as x to the 1/4, and so on. The number of that root is going to be what the denominator of your fraction is in your exponent. All right. So going through and solving an equation that is in that form. So you have x to some power is equal to a number. What do we do? Now, if n is odd, then that means that the value that you're looking at has one real root. Okay. So for example here, I have x to the fifth power. That is an odd root, so all you're going to be doing then is taking the fifth root of each side. So I'm taking the fifth root of negative 3,125. If you plug that into your calculator, that'll give you an answer of negative 5. Now, if n is even and the value that you have for a, so that number is greater than 0, then that means that you have 2 real roots. So whatever the root of that number is, you have to keep in mind that it could be positive or negative. Now here's an example that might be making sense. Okay, so I have x to the 6th equals 2,187. I want to know what number multiplied by itself 6 times gives me that large number. So what I'm going to do is take the 6th root of both sides. Now when I take the 6th root, I'll write that out here, I have x by itself. But we also take into account that when you have something that is an even power, if you take a negative times a negative, you get a positive. If you take a positive times a positive, you get a positive. So we have to take into account that the number we're looking for could be positive, or it could also be negative. So if I plug that value into a calculator, it's not going to be an exact whole number. I am going to have the decimal here. So we're just going to say it's going to approximate plus or minus 3.60. If you plug that into your calculator. So whenever you have an even root, you have to keep in mind it's positive or could be negative as well. Okay. Now if n is even and the value that you have is less than 0, then that means it has no real root. Okay. So if you have something with an even power and you want to solve and it says that it's equal to a negative number, this is automatically no solution. Or some people will dictate it as an S for no solution. Think about it if it was something like x squared equals negative 16, if we think about it like that. If I take the square root of both sides, you can't take the square root of a negative 16. You can't take a square root of a negative at all, so automatically that makes that no solution. Okay, so let's try some examples. Okay, so this one we're going to see some problems that require a few more steps. And that's just to get your variable by itself first. and then going through and solving. So your first step is to always isolate the power first. So I want to get that x to the 7th by itself first. So my first step here is going to be to divide both sides by -8. When I do that, I have x to the 7th is now alone, and that is equal to 128. And to get x fully by itself, I'm going to take the 7th root of both sides. And that's something you can do in your calculator. You don't have to do that by hand. X is now by itself, and I'm left with 2. And because that was an odd power, I only will have one root. Okay, let's try one that has an even power. Okay, so if I look at the example to the right of that, my first step is going to be to divide both sides by 2. So I have the quantity of x plus 5 to the 4th power equals 81. Okay, now to get that 4th root to go away, or to the 4th power to go away, I'm going to take the 4th root of both sides. And now remember, we're taking the root of an even number. So when I get rid of the stuff over here on the left side, I'm left with x plus 5 equals, but because I took that 4th root, I need to take into account that this could be a positive or a -3. And then lastly, to get x by itself, I'll subtract 5. So now x is equal to -5 plus or minus 3. And if I were to simplify each one of those, -5 plus 3 would give me -2, and -5 minus 3 is -8. So those would be my two solutions there for that one. Because I had that even root, I had to break it down. Okay. For this one, number 1, I'll divide both sides by 6. I get x cubed is equal to -216. And then I'll go through and take the cubed root of both sides. And when I do that, x is by itself. It's an odd power, so there is only one root. I don't have to worry about a positive and a negative. And since the number I started with was negative, I'm left with x is equal to a -6. Okay, let's try number 2. So I already have everything with the root by itself for question number 2. So to start off, I'm just going to take the 4th root of both sides. So x minus 4 is what I'm left with here. And I'm looking at plus or minus whatever the 4th root of 81 is. So let's rewrite my left-hand side. So x minus 4 plus or minus still stays. And the 4th root of 81 is 3. And now my last step, just to get x by itself, I'll add 4 to both sides. So I get x equals 4 plus or minus 3. And let's break that down. So if I take 4 plus 3, I get 7. And if I take 4 minus 3, I get 1. Okay. Starting to feel a little better about these. For question 3, let's add 14 to both sides. So I have x cubed is equal to 36. All right, and now I'm going to take the cubed root of both sides. And that's just something my calculator's giving me, and we're going to say it approximately equals about 3.30. We did have to do a little bit of rounding there to get that one. It's not a nice, pretty number, but that's as close as we could get. All right, let's try number 4. So my first step, let's add 7 to both sides. We want to make sure that root is by itself. So I have x to the 4th equals 10,000. And then lastly, I want to take the 4th root and now remember, because I'm dealing with an even root, x could be a positive or a -10. So you have two possible solutions there when the power is even. All right, let's try these last two. So my first step here, let's subtract 3 from both sides for number 5. So I have 3x to the 5th equals -3. I'm one step closer now to having the variable by itself. I'll divide both sides by 3. X to the 5th is equal to -1. Okay, and now I want to take the fifth root of both sides. So that leaves me with x is equal to, well, the fifth root of -1 is just -1. All right, we got one more. So to start off with number 6, let's add 4 to both sides. So I have the quantity of x plus 2 squared equals 144. And now if I take the square root of both sides, I have to also take into account that this could be positive or it could be negative. So I have x plus 2 left over on the left. I have a positive or negative 12, since the square root of 144 is 12. And then lastly, let's subtract 2 from both sides. So now I have that x is equal to -2 plus or minus 12. And let's just simplify each one of those. If I take -2 plus 12, I get that x is equal to 10. And if I take that -2 and subtract 12, I'll get x is equal to -14. And that would be my pair of answers then for number 6.